We are here in a chemistry lab at Addison Trail High School, and very pleased to introduce to you the 2016 honoree of Addison Trail High School's Tradition of Excellence Award, the Alumni Award that has been presented now since 1999. And the gentleman who is the recipient of this year's Tradition of Excellence Award is Mr. Christopher Coletta, class of 1990. And Chris, welcome back to Addison, and congratulations on your honor.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
When's the last time that you were here at Addison Trail? Do any of these surroundings look a little familiar to you?
With the amount of construction and renovation that's been done, and the fact that I think that the last time I was here was in my last class in 1990, it actually doesn't look very familiar. I'm still waiting. We have a little bit of a walk around the tour later on today. I expect that some deep memories will be activated at some point today.
Well, the reason that we've chosen a chemistry lab as opposed to some other location is that Chris has really distinguished himself in his studies after Addison Trail, and certainly in his career in the healthcare field. And just your education alone speaks to what I think would have been a great start that you had in classes here at Addison Trail. So when you left Addison Trail, you were also extremely involved, successfully so, in professional cycle racing, correct? And you went on to the Olympics at that point. Talk a little bit about some of the things that you did, maybe around the time where you were getting involved in Olympic cycling and the participation in the Olympics.
Sure. Well, after I left Addison Trail, the plan was to go down to the University of Illinois. I had been accepted as a freshman there in business administration. In the summer between high school and college, I had planned to do a number of cycling races, one of which was at altitude. It was a multi-day race in Wyoming. And because we're at sea level, I needed to get acclimated before going out to that race. And as luck would have it, 2 weeks before that race, there was the Junior World Trials Championships that were happening in Colorado Springs. And if you had seen my racing career, there was no reason to believe that I'd be competitive in any of the events. So I wasn't going there to make a spot on the team. I was going there to get as much intense exercise as possible at altitude. So I had enrolled in every event. And as it turned out, one of the events on the track, during my qualifying round, I had broken the national record and had qualified first in that round by multiple seconds. So that was a little bit of an indication that there was a talent that I had that I wasn't fully exploiting. Some sort of, I mean, for any professional sport, in general, you have some sort of physiological abnormality that allows you to do things that others can't. The goal is to find out how to leverage that as much as possible. So for me, it was the ability to recover from a very intense effort very quickly. So after that first round, I had kept on going to the subsequent rounds, ended up coming in second in that qualifying event, but it was enough to get me qualified to go to the Junior World Championships later that summer.
Now you're all of 18 at this point,
I
right?
was 18, that's exactly right, 18 years old. Never actually made the race that I had gone to Colorado to acclimate for. So I stayed there. It was the location of the Olympic Training Center as well. So I'd stayed at the Olympic Training Center to prepare for the Junior World Championships later that summer. Ended up going there, racing in 2 events, came in 9th in both of them, or actually, excuse me, 6th in both of those events. And I thought that it was a great experience, and then off I was back to the University of Illinois. Went to my first semester there, and they had invited me to live in a full-time basis out in Colorado at the Olympic Training Center to become a member of the long team for the event that I ultimately went to the Olympics for, which was the 4-man team pursuit.
Where, in 92?
In 92, that was in Barcelona. Okay. That's right. Yeah. So that was, it changed the course of my life. So I didn't drop out of school. The University of Illinois had a great policy, which in retrospect was perfect for me, where you could come and go largely as you pleased. I don't know if it's still in place, but it was at the time. And you had, I think it was 8 years and 10 semesters to finish your degree. Yeah. So I spent over the next 4 years, so after going to the Olympics, I had continued racing for a couple of years, and coming back to the University of Illinois in the fall semester sometimes. I think I went to 3 semesters over 4 years. And then at some point in between, which would have been 2 years after the Olympics, so between the 1994 and 1995 season, I was living in Colorado. Actually, scratch that. I was living in Arizona. in Flagstaff, Arizona, and my roommate at the time had a number of books. He was a huge reader. They were stacked up everywhere. And since it was the off season, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, did some reading. And then I read a couple of books by a scientist named Richard Feynman. He had a couple of anecdotal, kind of anthologies of his anecdotal stories. And that is what really changed my life from cycling to science.
You were looking at business administration at U of I.
That's right.
Initially, right? And then that changed once you saw the books and got a little more inspired.
That's right. I mean, and I wasn't exactly, during those first 3 semesters at University of Illinois, wasn't the best student. I was going there. It was mainly as a distraction from the racing season. But then when I did come back, it was because I had read those books by Richard Feynman and thought, I want to learn to think like that. So he really did a great job of bringing to life the mind of a scientist and how they view the world.
Talk about the discipline, though. You're 18 years old, 19, in and out of U of I, going to the Olympics, seeing all the celebrity there and all the things you could have done. How did you discipline yourself to get back on track, change your major, go into something that was going to be pretty intense, pretty rigorous, and then continue on from there to where you ultimately were able to get your advanced degree?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think so. First, on the decision to leave cycling and come back to school. So I was 23 when I decided to leave cycling. Still young enough, and I was completely unencumbered. So no wife, no children. Really, the last sliver of life when you can be completely selfish and do something like immerse yourself in a field of study for a number of years in the way that's required to set yourself up to do things well in that field. So I was 23 years old. I was still young enough and mentally immature enough to slip right in with the 18 and 19-year-olds. So that was one of the major drivers, that I didn't really see myself having a career in cycling and continuing down that path. So it was time to make that decision while I was young enough to go back onto that academic route. So that was the first thing that drove the decision. And then once I was in the classroom, it really was. You mentioned the discipline that I had developed when I was a cyclist. I think it was surprising to me how well that transferred first over to my studies in chemistry, and then in retrospect to just about everything else I've done in life. So there was a lot of delayed gratification in cycling. So my event, in the Olympics, the 4-man team pursuit, it's a 4-minute event or under if you do well. There are a lot of 100-mile rides that underlie those 4 minutes. And when you're starting to do that type of very long, intense training, many times you'll be halfway through a ride and you'll ask those around you, how much longer? And the best answer that I learned is just pedal. Just focus on what you need to do now. This is a building block that's going to get you to the end of the ride. This ride is a building block that is going to get us to the peak physical conditions so that we can perform in the target races that we want to do well in throughout the year. And that simple 2-word phrase, just pedal, is something that I used when I was in college again too, because here I was. I decided that I wanted to think like a scientist, but there was no reason why I should have succeeded. It was 5 years since I had taken my last science class. I was a diligent but not spectacular student in high school.
This type of a room right here.
So I paid attention, but I paid attention just enough.
Okay.
My focus was elsewhere, a lot in sports in high school, but it was not obvious that I was going to be able to be successful in that environment. And what ended up happening was I took that philosophy of just pedal and I applied it to everything. So I had to learn calculus, but I had barely remembered trigonometry, algebra.
You were tested. This is all at U of I, and then from there, U of I led to Harvard. Is that correct?
That's right. So with a stop in the pharmaceutical industry in between. So after I graduated from the University of Illinois, I moved out to the East Coast and worked for Pfizer, so a large pharmaceutical company where their world headquarters, yeah, exactly, their world research headquarters are in Eastern Connecticut. So I spent about 4 years there at the bench doing medicinal chemistry. And towards the end of that time, I knew that I was always planning on going back to graduate school. I was debating between going back for science or back for medicine. So I had taken the qualifying exams for to enter medical school. That was probably one of the things that drove me towards making that decision to leave Pfizer and go to graduate school, is those scores were running out.
That would have been a logical step. I would think we'd go to medical school.
That's right. But in the end, I realized that I liked research much more than I liked the idea of doing clinical work. And the advice that I got from everyone who had done both research and clinical work was, if you don't think you want to see patients, do not get an MD.
Get out of it.
Go do a PhD. So that's what I did. I ended up going to Harvard for it took me about 5 years to get my PhD, and the plan was actually to go back into the pharmaceutical industry, because I went to graduate school because I liked my boss's job a lot better than my job at Pfizer.
We always do,
exactly. It was a lab leader who was really driving the thinking and the problem solving towards getting to the point where you have turned something from a chemical into a druggable entity.
Right. But you found a different path to take. You got away from the bench, as you said, doing the chemical work in the pharmaceutical industry, to become more of a one who would work with these companies.
That's right.
In healthcare planning, which I would say probably around that time was really a hot topic. Americans were talking about it because it was being fed to us constantly about the crisis in healthcare, the need for reform in healthcare, the costs that were involved. Were you entering that field, that part of your career, just around the time where the healthcare discussion was pretty hot at that
Yeah. I think there were a couple of things. So the interruption of my path from PhD back into the pharmaceutical industry actually came in the form of an alternate career seminar at Harvard around my 4th year. And there was a group from a consulting company called McKinsey, which is the firm I actually ended up joining. And the way that they described it was essentially, we bring you on. We work with the leaders of various industries on their intractable problems, things they can't solve on their own internally. So you get to work on the hardest problems in any industry for between 3 weeks and 3 months at a time. And then you get to go on and do something new.
You're brought in with the people who are already there, the people who are already working on this. You're brought in to work alongside them.
That's right. Yeah. So sometimes it depends. Sometimes alongside you're embedded in a company. Sometimes there's an outside-in analysis and view that's required to provide an outside-in perspective on a recommendation for a path forward. But it sounded like a made-up job. Right, so you go into these areas. Yeah, you go into these areas where there's no reason why you should be able to advise the leaders of these different companies. But the way that they structure things, they take people who are very dedicated to and very curious and have a great analytical ability, and they put them on teams where there are the leaders of those teams and the partners in the firm do have that esoteric knowledge, the specific content knowledge that's required to be able to take the raw intellectual horsepower that the bottom of the pyramid, those of us who are just coming into that field, and guide us and then craft that into something that's very meaningful for the leaders of these different industries.
How difficult was it, though, when you talk about being embedded in a company, and here's people who could have had 10, 20, 30 years, in a company in a healthcare field, and here you come in as a strategic, help us out of these problems and kind of point us in the right direction. Did you get a lot of resistance from people who worked there and said, look, I know what really goes on here, and I appreciate all this? Was that difficult for you, or did you have to kind of work beyond that, or was it even a challenge at all?
It was a huge challenge, and I think it's a huge challenge for anyone that goes into that industry, because you're right. As a consultant, you're coming in and you're talking with people who are across the table from you, sitting next to you, that have 20 or 30 years of experience. And particularly coming in with a PhD, where your currency is your knowledge. Right, you have to shift your perspective, because you're not going to tell them anything necessarily that they don't already know about their job. It's about bringing a different perspective and asking them questions in a way that help them to think about the areas that they're not thinking about now. So, the pro of working in a place for 20 or 30 years is you do have this incredible depth of knowledge. The potential con is that you have a lot of biases that are developed over those 20 or 30 years, and you have your blind spots, right? So the key is finding that working relationship where you're able to dive into that industry, really understand the history of that industry, some of the content that you need to have a reasonable discussion with somebody who has been doing this for 30 years. But you don't tell them what to do. You ask them questions that reveal areas that they hadn't thought about before, potentially help them think about their problems through a different lens. You bring examples from other industries. You bring a fact base that can align everyone on what the problem even is and then how to overcome that. So that's really the difference. And it was a vast difference from the way that I operated before, which is I come in because I know something, rather than I come in because I have a different way of thinking about things, and we can, together, with your 30 years, and my being largely unburdened with experience, to put it, we can find a way forward that wouldn't have been possible with either of us working on the problem on our own.
So now that's Co-Actuate. That's the company that you're working with now as a senior partner.
Yeah, so I do that now with Co-Actuate Consulting. I did it after my Ph.D. with McKinsey, and then in between those two, I was at Amgen, a biopharmaceutical company on the West Coast. First doing corporate strategy, so just standard generalist corporate strategy. But then I quickly, after a very short time in the corporate strategy group, recognized that there was an area that was emerging that nobody really knew anything about, but was going to be critically important to the future of healthcare, which is drug delivery. And I can give you a little bit of background on that. So with the biologics revolution, there has been a shift in the way that drugs are discovered, developed, sold. And the focus has gone from small molecules, which you can formulate into a pill and take, something we're very familiar with, to large molecules. So really they're using the building blocks of biology to make these large biologic-like molecules that can't be taken orally, because we've evolved over millions of years to be able to destroy things like that come into our body. Our immune system, our everything from our immune system to the pH of our stomach to the enzymes that are even in our mouth, right? So you start to pick apart those biologic-like molecules immediately. They have to be injected. They have to be either injected through intravenous route of administration or just under the skin subcutaneously. And as the biotech industry has evolved, they've gone from identifying drugs that can be a replacement for things that that a body doesn't produce, or the body
dies or breaks down in the body.
EPO is a good example of that, right? So this is really where it kind of brings the darker side of my cycling background. I was never using EPO, but a lot of my friends did. And biotech, so Amgen, the company I work for, I mean, that's how they made their name, was being able to develop a way to produce EPO so that you could boost your red blood cell count for patients that were either going through chemotherapy or had some other deficiency otherwise. Right? But that's all administered in the hospital or in a clinical setting.
Which costs a lot of money to do that, too.
As we got better in the biotech industry of identifying different drug targets, the focus has shifted from things that are for either acute or short, or chronic things that are administered in a hospital setting, to more general medicine type drugs that are administered in a home setting. So that's where the problem of needles and having to deliver things through, so from a safety standpoint, having needles in the house, and also from an adherence and compliance standpoint. Exactly 0% of people want to have stainless steel piercing their skin at some point. And it makes it very difficult to get people to want to accept a drug and want to keep on taking the drug. So what I did at my time at Amgen, for the most time, I was the lead of the Drug Delivery Innovation Group. And it was a group that I had established and led for the last 3 years that I was there. And it was really focused on trying to determine how can we find ways to make drug delivery administration, where normally you would need to have a needle-based delivery, much more palatable for the patients. And it was interesting because it required me to draw my background, because there was no set path. There was no blueprint for how to do that. You needed to understand, because in the end, it was a matter of influencing human behavior, which means that you were delving into the human psyche. And when you do that, all bets are off. So it was needing to really understand what you had to do to change human behavior, But at the same time, you need to have a deep technical understanding because you need to understand what are the tools that I have, what are the emerging tools that I have in this space to be able to go ahead and apply that in a way that was going to influence human behavior.
It's absolutely fascinating, Chris, to hear this and to hear the cutting edge of it. Couple things. First of all, who were your influences when you were here at Addison Trail? Like I said, we're sitting in a chemistry lab. There's a group coming in a few minutes. Mr. Nelson, the instructor, has been very kind to let us come in and kind of invade his space.
Right.
But you were in settings similar to this. There's a little different building back then.
Right.
Who were some of your influences? Do you remember from back in the early 90s?
I do, and as I've been thinking about this, and I've thought about this through the years, and I really started thinking about it a lot before I came back. These teachers are in an incredibly difficult position because I was, as mentioned, I was a diligent student, but not a spectacular student. I was not somebody probably that would have stood out, and it really, without that kind of feedback that you are influencing people, right? So I mean, it's not always going to be a stand by me moment where they see the light bulb go off. But I think from a science perspective, I took IPS my first year as a freshman, and Mr. Jugel was teaching that. And as I think back in terms of where some of that baseline curiosity about the physical world and a healthy skepticism, a desire to really understand how things worked, that was awakened, as I mentioned, by the reading of the Richard Feynman books, that was really instilled by Mr. Jugel. Right, so the way that he questioned things in a productive way and showed that there was a path to knowing why. Or if not why, at least exploring the physical system to understand how things worked. I think so. That was it was latent though, and it bloomed later. It wasn't obvious at the time.
That's right.
Certainly. And Mrs. Stevens for writing. So my wife is actually an English professor, and when we were dating, she asked me, so how did you actually learn how to write in a way that is full sentences?
Stevens.
And I said, I don't have any idea. There's no reason. There's nothing in my career that would need me to do this. But I brought it back to the writing exercises that she had, and which at the time seemed like a pointless, ridiculous exercise. We couldn't use the verb to be. But in retrospect, that really shaped the way that I think about writing and how I constructed sentences and thoughts. On the sports side, Larry Foss, Mr. Hammond, two very big influences on the
track and cross country area.
Yeah, and for those, so I mentioned the just pedal kind of mentality. I think that was when that first really started to be instilled in me. Was the idea that you're doing these things. So for Mr. Hammond, I was a hurdler, I was a triple jumper, I was a high jumper, and there was a lot of mechanics that you had to get right. And so it was that idea of doing these different exercises, these different activities that when they all came together would help you to perform on the day of the competition. But it wasn't always obvious, particularly for an easily distractible 14, 15, 16-year-old, how this was going to link to that. And similarly with Mr. Foss and cross country, the same kind of thinking. So here we are, we're doing these long runs earlier on. How does this link to actually something?
What gets you through challenging times where you need to kind of find a place where you can be happy or find fulfillment? What's the one thing that you love, you go back to all the time? Where would you find that in your career? In your life?
Well, for now, it's I'm in a good position where you mentioned that I work for a consulting company called Coactuate now. The way that I look for work and the way that I find projects to bring into the company is I generally look for things that it's not clear why I'm the right person for that. Right? So on paper, I wouldn't be the right person to lead that project. So so professionally, that rejuvenation, the inspiration comes from throwing myself into the abyss just about every time and having to really learn something fundamental in order to be successful. What I bring is a baseline knowledge across a number of different areas, but also a nonlinear way of thinking where I will be able to get to a solution that others who are maybe on paper more qualified to tackle these problems wouldn't be, because again, and it goes back to that idea of being burdened with experience. You want to have just enough experience, but not too much. So on the professional side, it's really the nature of the work that I choose and how I choose to approach it, which is that I need to deliver something very tangible. And I'm not in an academic setting. I'm in an industrial setting in a capitalistic society. I need to deliver something of value, but I do so in a way that I'm not turning the crank. I'm not doing things I know how to do. I have to teach myself something. I have to learn something in the process. On the personal side is that as soon as I walk through the door and I come home, I leave all of my work on the other side. So,
that's great. That's a challenge.
Yeah, and part of that comes from my inability to concentrate in non-ideal settings where I'm easily distractible. So if I do try to work at home, I'm about 3% efficient. So I just stopped working at home altogether. But it allows me to really be with the children and my wife all of the time when I'm there, and not be distracted, not be thinking about something else.
Well, Chris, congratulations on your honor as Tradition of Excellence honoree this year. It was a pleasure meeting you, fascinating to talk about your career, and wonderful to know that it started here at Addison Trail High School. This year's Tradition of Excellence honoree, Christopher Coletta, very special in that this is Addison Trail High School's 50th anniversary, and we're pleased to welcome back to Addison Chris Coletta as the 2016 honoree in their Tradition of Excellence Alumni Award from Addison Trail High School. Chris, pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much. Congratulations. You're very welcome. Good to see you again.